hard to believe and harder to swallow, we are 6 months in now to this 2.0 White House, and it gets a little more nightmarish every day. It's definitely a time for faithful resistance. And although public protests are enormously important and probably cannot be overstated, they are not the only way to stand up for your values. And you're about to hear two conversations that make that exact point. In the vein of all politics is local, and its faithful resistance corollary, you can get personally involved in local politics. We'll talk with the Jeffco organizer of Together Colorado to find out what local issues have people most concerned. And then our second conversation is with JUC's Director of Faith Exploration, Sarah Billerbeck. It focuses on how to talk to kids about what's going on in these very anxious times. Okay, back to conversation number one. From the grassroots group Together Colorado, we have an update from the Jeffco organizer, Mackie Samasad. We're so glad to welcome back Mackie Samasad from Together Colorado. She's the organizer in Jefferson County. I guess I should say organizer, singular. And it's a lot of work for one person to do, but welcome, Mackie. Thanks for being with us again. When we first talked, you were at the beginning of the process of having a whole bunch of house meetings all around the area to try to find out what people were thinking about resisting, what their important issues were. And I would like for you to bring us up to date. Let's start that way. What did you discover?
Yeah, thank you so much for, first of all, inviting me back and, for allowing me to give an update on the House meetings. We are wrapping up our season of listening, community listening throughout Jeffco, and proud to say that between, folks are still doing House meetings, but so far we've done more than 20 House meetings from Littleton to Golden to Wheat Ridge to Lakewood. It's really happened all over the county. And we've reached over 150 people in these House meetings. They were really well attended. On average, like 7 to 10 folks attended each one. And I know at JUC, there was also an ongoing series of porch meetings that JUC can folks and folks who were really engaged in sharing their stories and how they're directly impacted. So after all of this listening, proud to report that housing actually, specifically the need for affordable housing for our unhoused neighbors and, just ensuring that Jeffco can be an affordable place to live in, emerged as the top issue. It was between housing and immigration, but housing was, kind of eked out the top spot. You could say.
I'm so interested in how housing got to the top.
Yeah, I think a lot of it really stemmed from seeing our unhoused neighbors, on the streets of Lakewood and Golden, and really being confronted with the reality of homelessness. And also just generally speaking, the inability of most folks, specifically young folks and senior folks, to be able to afford a home or to downsize because they wouldn't be able to, afford a new home in the city they're living in. So it really cuts across age, race, income, neighborhood.
Yeah. The supply is not there. So the prices keep going higher and higher. Immigration does not surprise me in the least. And I bet it didn't surprise you either because you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. So a lot of it, as you can probably imagine, stemmed from, being the threat of being potentially deported from our immigrant neighbors.
The next question that I just can't wait to ask then is these interests, these topics have risen to the top in these meetings. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, well, thank you. There's always a good call to action to have. So now that we're wrapping up this season of listening, we are going to be entering, and we've actually started doing these research meetings We're calling them research meetings, but essentially they are relational meetings that you have with your local elected officials and key decision makers around housing, immigration, and other concerns you might have, like healthcare. And really, they're just sort of fact-finding missions
Sure.
where you're learning from elected officials about their individual stance on these issues. What policies do they support? What policies do they not support? What's the landscape of how they can actually impact? And where are they on the power map as far as what they're actually able to influence at the local and the countywide level? And so, um, so yeah, we're going to have these research meetings happen throughout the next couple of months. We've had folks in the Jeffco chapter of Together Colorado start breaking out into their local teams. So we have a team in Golden, in Arvada, in Lakewood, and Southern Jeffco to really, focus on local housing issues, like what's specific to Lakewood, what are the zoning sort of fights that are happening. And really the point is to like localize it so that it impacts your actual community. And also because factually speaking, that's where most of the housing decisions are made.
Well, plus here we face this onslaught of executive orders and now big, beautiful bill legislation out of Washington. And that feels so far away and so big and so beyond our capabilities as people who live in the suburbs of, west of Denver. But having local focus feels like maybe there's something that's doable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is actually one of the most powerful things you can do right now is to get involved at the local level, get to know your city council people, your county commissioners, and start building these relationships and really start looking at, okay, who's my neighbor, right? Like who can I impact on a more direct relational level? And yeah, I mean, it all comes back to relationship and the power of relationship. When everything feels so powerless at the national level. And like you said, it's an onslaught and, the effect is to render people powerless. What we can do together is to build strong relationships, build community with each other, and care for our most vulnerable. And that includes, being able to afford a house and working with your officials to make sure that happens, and protecting our immigrant and our low income neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't imagine you went to all of these House meetings. Maybe you did. Maybe you went to a lot of them, but
Yeah, just a few.
Really only so many hours in a day and one person doing this for Together Colorado and Jefferson County. But the point I'm eventually going to get to in this sentence is what kind of feeling did you and other organizers get about people's attitudes now? What's the level of concern, frustration, angst, hope?
Yeah, I mean, there was almost every single emotion on the map, right? Generally speaking, everyone was anxious and fearful and, feeling a sense of powerlessness about what can be done in this moment. But surprisingly, and, not so surprisingly as well, people also felt really determined to fight back. And so as much as they were scared and, worried about just being paralyzed, there were enough folks who said like, enough, we have to start fighting back. And yes, that means protesting at the national level and attending rallies and things like that. But it's also how are we most going to make an impact in our community? And that involves the local actions that I mentioned earlier. And it really just requires these flickers of hope, right? And they were strong flickers, and I saw them. I attended just a few House meetings, but it was enough that you got a sense of like, yeah, I mean, we can do this together. And I think that really comes from the power of um, being able to share their own stories of fear and powerlessness and being vulnerable, and realizing that you're actually in this together as a community, and you're not alone, and so you can actually fight back together.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the update. I'm sure, I hope we'll talk again to kind of give, because this is, if there was a long-term process, this is it. This is not going to be a one and done. I'm sure we'll talk again. Thanks for the update.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care, y'all.
That group is working hard to make a real impact in upcoming local and state elections. And Sarah Billerbeck, she works hard with the families and kids at our church every day to give them a solid grounding in Unitarian Universalist values. And it made me wonder what I would say to a first grader or a sixth grader these days. So I have children in my life, but they're grandkids. So they're not around day to day when I'm screaming at the television or the computer about the latest thing that's happened from the White House. Now, I think if I had my own 6-year-old or 10-year-old in the room, I would at least take care of the swearing part. And it made me think, what would I say? What would a good approach be to deal with these political times with children? So we've asked Sarah Billerbeck, who is the Director of Faith Exploration at Jefferson Unitarian Church, to join us today to talk a little bit about these family matters in this time. Welcome, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. And let's start with, what kinds of things do we say at church to families to help them navigate this world we're in right now?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris, for having me here. So when we are at church, we really talk about developmentally appropriate language. So thinking about what age and stage a child might be at before we figure out how we're going to approach talking to them. So for our youngest ones, talking about things that could be scary, talking about how it might be in their life something that they hear other people talking about, making them very comfortable to ask questions, but not volunteering too much information, kind of following their lead and figuring out what they might already know and what you can kind of talk about. And then as they get older, we can definitely, I still recommend not bringing it up, but if something big happens in the world, then, or if they overhear a conversation, then I recommend talking about, how are you feeling right now about that? What did you hear? What do you know about this? And then really letting kids ask questions, I think at any age is very important. So we recommend all of those things. We do a lot of work at church also on helping kids recognize their feelings and be able to talk about them. And that can really be helpful when kids are exposed to some of these scary things.
What have kids been saying? Have they been talking about the angst in the world, at least the way we're kind of feeling it on the faithful resistance end of the spectrum?
I think as the older the kids get, they definitely are talking about it. And they especially middle schoolers, or maybe probably like 5th and 6th graders and up, they have quite a really good awareness about the things that are going on, and because they do hear their parents talking about it, and our parents are definitely engaging kids in conversations. Our youngest ones, I haven't noticed as much, except that there is just a general feeling of like people are kind of stressed out, and kids really pick up on that. So
yeah. But so, and then the high school group, I mean, that's a whole different. Well,
they're just so engaged already. Yeah. And so it can be really, the conversations with them are really rich, and they have such great perspectives being teenagers and seeing the world and navigating the world. And I think some of the great hope for the future comes from them, because they really are able to think out of the box a lot and think about how we might solve things. And that's inspiring.
For those people who might not be quite as familiar with Unitarian Universalism, which is a huge portion of the world, where are we coming from as a faith in looking at things like immigration, for example? That's been such a huge topic of conversation. What kinds of grounding do they have in Unitarian Universalism to look at these issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things is that when we're looking at living by our values, and in Unitarian Universalism, we have a value of pluralism, we have a value of generosity, we have a value of equity and inclusion. And when we're talking about all of those values, we talk about how they show up in our own lives and how they show up in the world. And definitely having a spirit of generosity and embracing pluralism and welcoming people from all over the world who are here, welcoming people with differences, and then looking at how they're treated is something that we talk about from the get-go, and that Unitarian Universalism really leans into.
Well, with love at the center.
Yes,
That's
with love at the center.
Yeah, that's how we approach things. I wonder if any kids have ever mentioned to you kids in their schools who have radically different points of view, and how to find, I don't know, are you looking for common ground with those kids? Are you defending? I mean, it's not like we're a super political church. You're not giving them political arguments, but just what approach when they encounter disagreement.
Yeah, I think we really try to encourage them to be open-minded and to really listen. We focus a lot on deep listening from an early age in our church. And so really helping kids to be able to listen to another point of view. We practice that sometimes in our classes, not necessarily with politically charged subjects, but we do want to prepare them for kids who might have different opinions. And we really want them to be open-minded and to listen with their heart open. That's really important to us. And then to also be able to make their own argument or be able to stand strong in their own side also. So we try to do both.
Have you talked to them about faithful resistance as kind of a concept?
Yeah, we have. Kids are very into that idea because kids are a little bit naturally resistant sometimes. so they really embrace that, and the kids have such an amazing spirit and dedication to helping other people. And so when we talk about how our actions, even if they're small, like we might be baking desserts for the unhoused people at Arvada Rising, that is an act of faithful resistance, because some people don't really want to have unhoused people in their neighborhood or in Arvada. And we are doing something not only to help the people, but also to show that we really support the idea of welcoming everyone and to make sure that we are helping everyone.
Has a parent ever asked you for your advice on whether to take their kids to a protest? And what would you say if they had?
Yes. So we actually have had some JUC kids at protests that we've gone to as a church. I think showing kids or letting them have the experience of being in a protest is really important. And I think as long as you think about safety, I think it's very, very appropriate for kids to be able to go. You know, the normal safety things like don't be right in the middle of the crowd, be a little bit off. So if you needed to leave, you could, kind of keeping your eyes open for any danger, parking your car a little bit far away so you can walk to the car and then drive away if you need to. So being realistic about things that could happen, but also just allowing kids to go and experience the amazing sort of connection and community that protests often bring.
Yeah. We often include in our conversations for this podcast ideas about what a person can do to help in faithful resistance. What thoughts come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think with families, there are so many opportunities, like to make food. Food is a big one. There are lots of, even through JUC, we have opportunities for people to participate in making food for the Rising. Even in lots of communities, there are local centers, action centers that you could collect food for, that you could volunteer to serve food. So that's a big one and a pretty easy one for families to get involved in. I think getting kids, if you're writing a letter to Congress, just sort of helping them see your process is really good too, because it sort of plants a seed for them that this is something that they can do. They can write to Congress even at any age, but just naming the things, the actions that you're taking as an adult can be really helpful too. And then just being part of a church community or any other type of community where people are all coming together, I think also help kids see the value of of a mass effort.
Thank you. It's just the kind of conversation I envisioned with you, Sarah, to have the positive look at how families and kids can stand together and be grounded with their Unitarian Universalist faith. So thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you have ideas for topics or people to interview, please email us at faithfulresistance@jeffersonunitarian.org. And please share this podcast with other people of goodwill and subscribe. And then for opportunities for social justice action and education, please check out the Faithful Resistance page at our website, jeffersonunitarian.org. And just keep on doing the next right thing. Go out, do the next right thing.